Thank you for inviting me today, and also thank you for coming to listen on such a lovely day. So I'm going to talk for half an hour, and I'm going to give you a very quick and general overview into my practice as an artist. I studied painting at St Martin's School of Art in London. I have no architectural training or urban planning training, but I found myself saddling these kind of different disciplines, if you like, through the research that I've developed. And that research has different strands. One of them is utopia, which I'm something very dear to my heart, and something that I also teach. I teach a seminar on utopian studies in Copenhagen as part of my department. Playgrounds and play is also another thread within my research. I've traveled most of North America and Europe photographing playgrounds, and all of those playgrounds are on my website, which is dismalgarden.com. They're all archived there on my website. This particular instance here, this is an adventure playground, which is a playground designed and built by children, where they have access to tools and so on. This is a playground in Germany. And also defensible architecture. Designs that prevent you from doing things, so things that prevent you from sitting down, from loitering, from urinating in the street, all those types of things that stop you from, stop your desires, if you like. And that's also on my website as an archive. And I've been looking at these designs, which have proliferated recently quite fast because of the sort of fear of terrorism. And I've been looking at these objects for around 15 years now. And then also alternative education, and looking at alternative pedagogy and how, particularly, in art schools mostly, looking at how trying to develop different methodologies within teaching art students. Okay, so that's a kind of overview of the things that I've been looking at over the last 10, 15 years. And all these things lead in, you'll see them kind of appearing in the work that I'm going to show you. So this is a piece from the early 90s, and it's a model of a small section of Tompkins Square Park in New York. And it's basically a design to prevent people from being evicted from the park. So it's a monument to civil disobedience. It's purely a utopian proposal, it's not a real proposal, but it's a proposal for public sculpture that would be designed in order to stop people using the park from being evicted from the park. And that's a model to show you how the monument would look. Also during the 90s, I worked on this public sculpture, which was a mobile library, which was powered by recycled vegetable oil and had solar panels on the roof. The library of books were pretty much pertaining to the things I discussed earlier, utopia, particularly urban gardening, different alternative methods of looking at the city. Alternative energy systems and so on. And this vehicle traveled most of Europe for 2 years. And I forgot to mention, at the back was a garden built into the back, a greenhouse, and of mostly kitchen plants, things like peppers and herbs and so on. There was no real scientific reason to actually have a mobile garden, but it did actually function really well, and the plants really loved it. They really thrived in this moving environment. I think maybe also the vibration of the truck, they liked that. And also something that wasn't designed, I hadn't designed it, but it was kind of happened naturally. I don't know if you've ever slept in a coach before, in a school bus, but it's very cold at night and very damp, there's no insulation. So what would happen, because we'd taken the roof off and put some plexi over the top to create the greenhouse, it would collect condensation at night. We were quite thick condensation. And then when you started the bus up, it would vibrate and it would rain inside and water the plants. And then also on board we had a worm bin and water recycling and so on. I also have done a lot of murals, and this is for Piccadilly Circus tube station in London. It's quite an interesting station because it's a circle, it's a round station, and they have these panels up which different artists have commissions to produce murals for them. And also hand-painted murals as well. I don't paint them myself, but usually a local mural painter comes in and paints these different designs for me, which also refer back to the research that I touched upon at the beginning. I've also used my interest in teaching to develop sculptures and artworks. So this, for example, is an anarchist archive in Lausanne in Switzerland. And it's been in existence since the 50s. And the group of anarchists that run it, so from all over the world, anarchists send in their material to be archived in this library. And the anarchists there on the day, they decide whether it's anarchist or not. So they would unpack it, look at it, decide if it's anarchistic, they'll catalog it and put it in the library. If it's not, they put it in the recycler. So it's a very kind of ad hoc type of archive, but it has a great archive on alternative pedagogy. And if you're ever in Lausanne, I would really recommend visiting it. It's called CIRA, C-I-R-A. So what I did was, I was invited to do an exhibition in Geneva, in a museum in Geneva, and I basically took the upper space, so I basically measured this space and rebuilt it in a slightly smaller scale into this unit that displays and then took all their archive of alternative pedagogical material and displayed it in this unit, which was then an activated space where school kids would come and look at this anarchistic material and alternative pedagogical stuff. And the way that it's designed is you can also play on it. So you can climb on it, you can climb through it, you can climb underneath it and so on. Or there's sort of hidden areas which you can climb into, like hidden chambers. And that was made by a Swiss carpenter who made it perfectly, and it could be disassembled and then taken elsewhere, so it's actually used in different museums in Switzerland. I collaborate a lot with different friends and former students, and I've worked quite considerably with students on developing projects. And this is something I did for the Sculpture Center, which is in Queens, New York, building a kind of a summer school. And this is the campus for that summer school inside the Sculpture Center, where people could come and actually propose their own courses. So the school itself, which I made together with those kids who are from a school called the City As School in New York, we developed this space where people could then propose their own, basically, seminars and so on, and that would be for free for the public over the summer at the Sculpture Center. I was invited by Creative Time in New York to develop a project for the new Governor's Island, which used to be a military base, and they're now redeveloping it as a sort of luxury island for luxury housing and a park. And so I thought this was a great opportunity to develop a project which would, could you actually make a sculpture that would kind of that would try and stop or prevent gentrification? And is that actually possible as an artist to do that? And I thought one way of doing that would be to make something maybe as abject as possible. Not in a kind of disgusting way, but in maybe something that had no spectacular quality to it. So what I came up with, and this was before the financial crash, this was like 2007, I think. I decided to make a village of tents, a camp. And so it was a cross between a music festival, a homeless encampment, and a campsite. And over time, the tent slowly deflated and collapsed. The people who ran the project weren't allowed to touch them. And it also became overgrown as the grass grew. And there was no lit title to say what it was. It was just this thing there. And so it slowly became this very kind of terrible looking thing. But it didn't stop the gentrification of Governors Island. One thing it did do, though, it got the worst review of the whole project. Roberta Smith wrote probably one of the worst reviews I've ever had, and I thought, great, it worked on another level. So actually, in terms of cultural capital, it actually did work in the way that it actually had a bad review. So I thought that was actually quite a productive, that was a kind of productive element to it. I've also developed play. I use play a lot in sculptures and installations, exhibition design and so on, using my research into playgrounds to develop exhibitions around play. These are all just different types of installations. This is kind of a parody of a creative industry type office in a gallery called Raven Row in London. And built into it is here's a worm bin which you commune around for meetings. There's water recycling from the rooftops, and also in there is a small mushroom farm, all put together to make this kind of little office complex. And then something that's ongoing is a garden that I developed together with some permaculture gardeners in The Hague in the Netherlands. They invited me, this is 2008, just before the market crashed, and this institution called Stroom in the Netherlands invited me to think about this new area, which is going to be a kind of creative hub for The Hague. And there was already a master plan set up by Rem Koolhaas for that location. And this is his rather cynical proposal. And there you can see there's 3 kind of gherkin towers. There's a new MoMA. There was a marina for yachts. There was a Formula One racetrack, all part of his proposal for this sleepy Dutch town. And then the market crashed, and this was completely mothballed as an idea. But the project for the artist continued. And so I thought, what could be the sort of opposite of this planning from above? And I've worked together with these permaculture gardeners to kind of create maybe an idea of planning from below, to look at permaculture, which is a type of gardening that was set up in the 70s, or was conceptualized in the 70s, to look at, and it's basically a form of forest gardening, where the tree is central to the garden. And together we basically developed this garden in a municipal park in the middle of The Hague, which was a very formal park, and the city allowed us to do this, and it's still there. It's an ongoing, basically an ongoing urban farm. And we took ideas from like Bruno Taut. This is one of his utopian drawings of these kind of crystalline cities on the top of mountains. This is Taut's glass pavilion for the Cologne Architecture Fair, I think in 1912 or something like that. And taking those ideas as references, as kind of points of reference, I worked together with the gardeners to develop the project, which became in a way layers of workshops. So everybody who participated in the workshop actually participated in making the actual piece, to get a sense of ownership, if you like. So the people who came to learn about permaculture also designed the garden. So these are all just ideas of the different designs that were then eventually made. This is the beginning, the laying down of the permaculture area. And the different workshops that I said, like I mentioned, were kind of layered so that every part of the project became a workshop, which was open to the public for people to actually participate in. So from the building of the building itself, the pavilion that's in the garden, that was also a workshop using like recycled materials to put together straw bale, so on. This was the first type of building built like this in the Netherlands, because it's actually not allowed, because of building codes. It's actually not, you're not allowed to build them. And because it was an art project, we were able to sidestep those codes and make it, because it's just like a sculpture. And we slowly, also a sod roof as well, which has also became another workshop. And then the garden itself. What was interesting about this type of gardening is that this is almost the antithesis of what a park looks like, particularly in Europe, where the parks in Europe, and I would assume probably in Canada as well, they're very formal, laid out, well-maintained, kept, lawns and so on. And this garden represented almost the opposite of that. And visually, that actually created kind of quite a good draw for the project, because it looked so messy and so out of place that people came to look at it, which was kind of a bonus. And this, interestingly, is called a dead hedge, which is basically a hedge made of woody waste, which creates a kind of a very fertile, very diverse, a biodiverse area. And ideas like this that come from permaculture, you can see slowly spreading through cities. So, for example, now you see a lot of these dead hedges on the sides of motorways, because they create these corridors for wildlife to move through areas that which used to be quite difficult for them to do. And the idea for this project was to try and look at how permaculture could possibly develop further through the city. And then after this park was made, a second one was made in another park slightly further away. So the idea is that how maybe these things could spread through the city to then change urban planners' ideas of what maybe public spaces could look like and how they can function. This is a bridge that I designed it was opened in 2010, I think. And this is in Denmark. And this bridge, I was first asked to design a small bridge about this size, and then for a new town in Denmark. And after looking at the master plan for the new town, I realized there was no public space in the town. There's actually only the shopping mall was the only public space. So I proposed to them to actually make the bridge larger and to actually offer that up as a kind of a public space, as a town square, if you like. So the bridge became this multifunctional idea set upon two islands, and in an artificial lake, which took the runoff from the new town's roads and parking spaces. This is actually the day it opened, so it looks a bit grim because there's nothing. I mean, this is all brand new landscaping, so none of the plants have kicked in or anything like that. But the idea was to create, another idea that comes from permaculture was to create an edge. And one of the ideas in permaculture is that the more edges you have, so an edge between water and land, or a meadow and a forest, if you create these different types of edges, you create more biodiversity. And so the idea was to create more edge by creating these two islands in the lake to create a more biodiverse lake, if you like. There's also a playground built into this, into the bridge, and also different kind of spaces for people to meet. And now this looks very grim, this new town. It looks a bit like a prison. But now people that live there use this bridge for communal dinners and parties and things. That's what it looks like now. So it's kind of really built, all the reeds and so on are built. I'm going to speed up a bit now. This was a sculpture, a temporary sculpture made for Loughborough University, and the idea was to bring worms, students, and insects and birds together in one place so they could kind of commune together. So the design brings a kind of is a habitat for all those different actors, if you like. And there was Wi-Fi there to bring the students there. And then there was an insect hotel and so on to bring these different elements together. This is a temporary outdoor playground built as an office, which surprisingly I didn't actually think it would work, but it became very popular with local kids. And they wanted to keep it, but unfortunately it was made to be it was temporary made, so it had to be taken down, but it became this very well-used piece of play equipment. And interestingly, because of my research into play, I've been now invited to actually design playgrounds and make playgrounds, so that's become also part of my practice. is to start making playgrounds. Also teaching comes out, like I said before, comes out of my ideas and interests in alternative pedagogy and anarchism. Looking at this idea from this book called Street Work, where you don't actually have a classroom, you don't have a school, and also comes out of the ideas of Ivan Illich about this idea of where there is no real institution. You basically use a network. His ideas come sort of pre-internet, but the ideas that we're looking at in this book are schools that exist in the 70s that had no classroom, and they used the city as basically a campus. So they would use public transport, town squares, empty buildings, shops, offices, and so on for their classrooms. And so I thought, well, that could actually be quite a good idea for developing an art department, particularly one related to public art. And that's what I've been trying to do over the last 17 years, is try to develop this idea to teach art students about public art and the city. And I've done it in various different locations. So this is in Chicago, at the University of Chicago, where I developed a course over a semester really looking in detail at the city of Chicago and the alternative activities that were going on in Chicago. Artist talks and walks, for example, around the city, looking at infrastructural elements like composting and recycling. Looking, this is something similar I did in San Francisco, in Napa Valley, looking at former communes that some of them still exist, a couple still exists from the early 70s, and revisiting them, looking at alternative housing, looking at collective farms. This is in Geneva, where I also taught this program, and that's what I have been teaching now in Copenhagen for the last 9 years. And then I also developing larger kind of infrastructural type projects. This is a bird screen I developed for a park in Cambridge, made from the trees that were felled to make the park. So it's also climbable, so you can actually climb it as well. And again, I've been invited to design more bridges, mostly pedestrian bridges. I'm also taking existing buildings and then repurposing them, if you like. This is based on a pattern that was used in the time of the enclosure movement. So these are actually based on property maps, the pattern of this structure, which was something that King George IV, I think, which is his head there is this weather vane. This English Hanoverian king actually owned this part of Germany at the time. And as they started to enclose the land, they made these maps of where the private property was. And so this is what that design is based on. This is a school in Bristol, and then that's the same hut, kind of repurposed as a play hut. And then also looking at museums and how their collections could be redeveloped into a playground, for example. So this is a museum in Wales. It's one of those outdoor museums where they bring, I don't know if you have these in Canada, where you bring like a building from Victorian times, a pub from Victorian times, a farmer's hut from the early 18th century and so on. And they bring all these buildings together, rebuild them in this large campus, if you like, of the museum, and you go and visit all these different huts. And so I've designed this playground based on these fragments of these buildings. So this, for example, is based on a roof of an existing building in the museum, and I've redesigned it as a play structure, if you like. It's miniaturized for children, so they can actually play on the collection and in the collection. And that's just been put out to tender and will be finished by the end of the summer. And then finally, I was invited by the Rietveld Academy in Amsterdam to design a new museum for them. So I've started to think about my interest in play and how that could be actually developed into a library. And maybe you can't see it so in this drawing, but the shelving and the well, mostly the shelving of the books is playable. So you can, while you're using the library, you can also crawl and play on the structures within the library itself. And that's it. Thank you.
So I propose that we have a Q&A after the panel, if you'd like.